Hey y'all, so I was on manga stream Wednesday, right, to read my One Piece chapter. I believe it's 738, 738 or 739, something like that. Anyways, you know, Toy Soldier though, Toy Soldier though. I'm just saying that reveal. I knew it, but still, go watch my video on that, and you'll know my thoughts about that. Anyways, there was this video deals with an article that was written by one of the people on the manga stream site, right? I guess I'm one of the translators, or whoever it is, right? And it asked two questions. I will not deal with the whole favorite type art deal, and I don't really care about that. That's extraneous to me. It's arc by, it depends on the arc. It really is not a type of arc, a genre of arc, a classification of arc. I don't know. Some are found cool. It just depends on how it's individually done. Now, the point I want to get on, as you can see, is Logia, Paramecia, and Logia versus Paramecia versus Zoan. And I want to talk about, in a comparative analysis of, I want to bring this discussion of these three and find out which is better. Now we'll break it down into the pros and cons of each in four different categories. The first category I'll deal with are, let's say, the abilities. Okay, I'll deal with the abilities of the devil fruits. Now when we come into the Logia abilities, yeah, they're outright off rip the most OP, overpowered abilities of all devil fruits. That's a given. I mean, you come on, you think about it. What have the devil fruits we've seen? We've seen the Ice fruit, Kuzan, aka Aokiji's Ice fruit. We've seen Akainu, aka Sazuki's Magma fruit. We've seen Borsalino, Kizaru's Light fruit. We've seen the doggone Yami Nomi, Blackbeard, Marshall D. Teach's Darkness fruit. We've seen, let's see what else we've seen. We've seen the Lightning fruit. It nails godlike power. We've seen Fire Fist Portuguese, the Aces, Nomi, the Flare fruit, Fire. We've seen doggone, who else have we seen? We've seen Caesar Clown's Gas fruit. Oh my gosh. Ridiculous? The abilities these guys have. What else other Logia have we seen? Those are the ones off the top of my head. But anyways, simply outright OP status. Ridiculous. Oh, even Caribou's swamp fruit. I mean, now he's not that great. Oh shoot, how can I forget Sir Crocodile's the sand fruit, whatever it actually is, but the sand fruit. I'm just shaking my head because these guys are so damn OP. I mean, really off the rip, that's how great they are. But the only thing is the weakness of it. That's the pro. Okay, they're straight up powerful. It already puts you, if not top tier stats, you're already mid tier, off rip, mid tier. Mid tier is no joke. It's nothing to sneeze at. Okay, you're already New World level. Off rip. You're already new. You can go from wherever see you in, skip the whole Grand Line Paradise, drop you in a New World. That's the level you instantly get it put at. You can't say that about Paramecia and Zoan. So you already get a very powerful ability. Okay. Now, the weakness of it is the fact is, out of all of the abilities, they're relatively limited. And what I mean by that is, even though we've seen Akainu do the Magma Storm, Aokiji's Ice cover, I'm not saying it doesn't have a wide range of effect. What I'm saying is, we've even seen Sir Crocodile. He took the moisture out of people. He calls in. When you compare it to the Paramecia and even the Zoans, the amount of abilities is limited. At least that we've been showcased so far. I don't think that's going to change, because we're talking about the elements. They come with so much raw power that now Caesar Clown, they are still accepted. Caesar the Clown's gas fruit. That's control. But even though that's manipulation of gases around her, that's not really, it's phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but it's not really there's not much you can do with that. Annals, lightning, there's not, because you're the element itself, and changing that up, there's not much you can really do. There's another element for that. Oh, I forgot about Monet's so and so forth. So that's the weakness, even though it comes out of so OP, which makes sense, it's limited in what you can actually do with it. Now when you come to Paramecia are by far the most hacks abilities. They're most hacks. I mean, so many things. You the art fruit, the doggone toy fruit. I'm sorry if these are sports. The OP, the operation fruit. They're also Kuma's doggone his fruit. Kuma's ability. You got some crazy stuff. Matter manipulation. I could go into, y'all know all the pyramids. There's so many doggone pyramids. The flag, so many, and these some of the new ones. Trevor's ability is questionable what it actually is. But anyways, they're so damn hacks. They're so hacked. Especially if you eventually train them, the potential skyrockets. They're the most potential of all the devil fruits. While it's compared to the Logia, which start out super powerful. And here's the weakness. You have to train them like hell. Because if you don't train your doggone Paramecia devil fruit, it will actually be more of a hindrance than it will to help you. For example, Monkey D. Luffy, when he first started out as a kid, he couldn't even throw a punch properly. Think about that. His movements sucked. You look at who is another great example? Foxy. Foxy's ability was hacks as a mug, but without that, Foxy's he's weak. You look at Nico Robin's ability, ridiculous, but Nico Robin herself, it's questionable of her as a companion. I'm not saying she can't fight. She's very skillful with her devil fruit, but it's even Trafalgar Law. The question is his actual swordsmanship and whatnot. How powerful is he without his ability? Questionable. It brings you into very much question. So the weakness with it, while they are very hacks, different from OP, they're not limited like the Logia. Their potential skyrocket. It takes a boatload of training. Or it's a hindrance. And when you look at Zoans are right off the gate. They're pretty straightforward. Okay? With Zoan abilities, they're animal abilities. And they're like middle ground here. They're neither OP nor hacks, but physically you're a monster. You're powerful as a mug. They come in, they're meaningful, they're powerful, and it allows quicker regeneration if you get to a certain level. Their ability, it gives you 3 transformations, and when with the Logia, while you transform into the element. With Paramecia, you don't really transform, so it depends on your ability. Okay, now with Zoan, you can transform into multiple transformations. We see even with Tony Chopper, where with he's mastered doggone 6, and with the Rumble Ball he can unlock the monster. He has 6 to 7 post-time skip. Pre-time skip, he definitely had 7 different forms. So you have multiple forms, and every Logia, every Zoan, there's 3 different forms. So with their abilities, it allows you multiple transformation, which means gives you plenty of options off gate. The fact is, it doesn't take that much to train them. So to say, if you don't want, you're more powerful than the average person off rip. You look at doggone Rob Lucci's a monster. That was just enhanced. You look at pretty much the Kaku and Jabbar. You see they're monsters. The Zoans are nothing to play with physically. They're monsters. Okay, the Boa sisters, and all that's phenomenal. Now the weakness is their potential. It's not limited, so to say. It's just that their growth, their mastery of the devil fruit. You don't have to train much. So dudes can get away with a lot to begin with, but when going up against some of these top tier dudes, Zoan Devil Fruits, because dudes don't have to train them, you have to train both Logia and Paramecia. Even though Logia's come out so OP, you have to train them. Zones, you don't really have to train all that much. So that may be the downfall of their abilities. You don't really have to train them, so dudes won't be getting as powerful as they can be. You may have exceptions like Lucci, but he was already a monster, guaranteed that, before he became. So, you understand what I'm saying? That's the downfall. Now, when it comes to the second category, it comes to fighting ability, combat ability. With the Logia, their combat ability, their strength, with their OP nature, it's devastating. There are a few other fruits, you know, the Quake fruit, okay, for example, can go up against the pure raw of destructive nature. We're talking about elements here. When most of the most destructive feats we've seen thus far are from the Logias, hands down. They're well, you know, sought after because, yo, you get the power, you know, some can say the power of the gods. These mythological power. Not only some mythical zone, that's different. But what I'm saying is you get instant destructive capacity on a magnitude that you don't really get to see with the Paramecias and with the doggone zones. The weaknesses, what did I say? Dog, what category am I talking about? Oh, combat. The weaknesses, doggone, I mean, and also you have the Logia intangibility because they're element. The weakness is doggone hockey. And here's the thing what I mean by it. With hockey, now hockey affects all of them. But with hockey, it negates the Logia intangibility. And with the elements you see, oh, and I forgot about doggone Cap, Vice Admiral Smoker, okay? With Smoker is a beautiful example. One person was talking about this. And when Vertigo was fighting him, his Logia ability, Smoker's Logia ability was actually at his disadvantage because he was more to hit. If you have a monster in hockey, say a Dark King Silver's Rayleigh, say a Monkey Dugarp, say a red-haired Shanks, they go up against these Logia users. Garp is questionable, but anyways, they go up against these Logia users. They're gonna clown on these fools unless these fools have powerful hockey. If these fools don't have powerful hockey, these Logia users, they're done. Look at, for example, the Monster Trio versus Caribou. Caribou was a joke compared to it. You know, he was a joke. So the Logias, and it will get to a third point, when my third point with psychology. But anyways, the hockey negates a lot of the Logia's power. Okay? Because you may have all the power in the world, but if you can't really get off the attack properly, if you're constantly cornering in on the defensive instead of on the offensive, you're in trouble. Now, when you look at Paramecias, you look at what I'm talking about, combat prowess. Again, Paramecias, they're unpredictable. You don't know what somebody has. Like, it'll be quick to see. You don't know the full extent of what a Paramecia can do. For example, depends on, once again, skill. You look at Monkey D. Luffy, very highly skilled in his Paramecia use. Yo, all of the techniques he can do 20 to 25 different techniques. You know what I'm saying? You look at, even with Robin, all the different things she can do with hers. You look at, we don't know even the full extent of Law's ability at this point, for example. Shoot, even Buggy the Clown, the Stark, we saw him at the beginning of the series. We don't know what he can do now. We know that the upside for Paramecia is ridiculous. So when you look at the combat pros, you don't know, they're unpredictable. Even Mr. 3's Wax Fruit, okay, or Magellan's, these dudes can pull out, and it's not unreasonable because the full extent of a Paramecia fruit, from its name, it's hard to say. It's hard to know until we see it in action. But the thing about their combat, and I had mentioned training. The thing about with their combat is the Paramecia. Once you, how do I say this? Once you figure out their ability, often, for example, Sugar's the Toy fruit. they're often relatively easily defeatable. Unless they're a high quality combatant, they're easily defeatable. Now, while the Logia, the hockey thing, that presents something, you need very powerful hockey. With the Paramecia, you don't need that. You figure out their ability. Unless they're a high level opponent, they're dusted. So the thing about it is, while the Paramecia ability, their combat prowess are so upside and so unpredictable. Once they're figured out, it's pretty simple to beat them. You can set up strategies to beat them, okay, more easily than even Zoans or the Logia or even Zoans. And when you come with Zoans, they're close range fighters. At close range, they're absolute monsters. They're clearly the most powerful at close range. These dudes, the regenerative abilities. We see the awakened Zoan. They regenerate like that after getting stomped on. We see, so close range combat, they're monsters. They're absolute monsters. They have the abilities of the animals. They can do this and that. They work on instinct. You put them in a fight, you're going to have a hell of a fight. That's just what it is. There, you could say the most quickly adapted to fight. Now, here's the weakness of the Zoans. While the Logias, they have a hockey, hockey screws up their whole game. And you have the Paramecia, once you figure out their abilities, they're screwed up. Zoans, they're straightforward, but the thing is, if you come to them and you got distance game on them, if you come to them and you wear them out, you go to work on them. The Zoans, their stamina is highly questionable. They're not exactly, although they're powerful opponents, they're not exactly you don't really see high tier Zoan fighters unless they're mythical Zoans. And that's the thing, mythical Zoans are the rarest of the breeds. We've seen Mark of the Phoenix so far. He had the Phoenix fruit. And we've seen, it was the Blue Phoenix. And we've seen Sengoku, model. He's the Buddha. Sengoku the Buddha. He was the Golden Buddha. Unless you're mythical Zoan, the Zoans as combatants, they're not top tiers. Why? Because they're not on that level. They're typical animals. So it's like a cap on their ability. You understand that? Because once again, they don't train. Unless you train as a Zoan, you're gonna be at a certain point where you just get crapped on. Look at doggone Chopper. With all his transformations, I put him at best, and there's still a heavy gulf. At best, I have him when he's serious. He's the fourth most powerful Straw Hat post time skip at this point. Yes, above Frankie, and that's debatable, but yes, he's above Frankie. When he's not serious, he is arguably weaker than Usopp. He's still more powerful than Nami, but he's one of the weakest. You see that differential? With Zoans, they can't mess around. They have to get in and get things done, because if they don't, they're going to be taken out unless you're a top tier Zoan. Okay, so that weakness, Zoans, it's usage. It really comes down to how serious they are in their usage. They can't mess around. While Paramecias can screw with you, and as well as Logia, Zoans can't screw with you. Not compared to these other two. And now the whole third category, psychology. With the psychology of the Logias, there's a couple things you gotta consider. 3 things. Number 1, they understand I won't say their anatomy, but they come into the game, there's 2 strengths to it. They come into the game understanding power. Okay? They understand, and you look at these Logia users, they understand the essence of power. They know that they have to master their abilities. Okay? Because if you see that how, for example, when Toshigi was in the body of a smoker, it's a huge hindrance. Not unnecessarily the same kind of hindrance of Paramecia's. Paramecia's can be permanently hindered. Like even Luffy, like it gets cut. It's tough to say, but with the Logias, they're forced to understand power. They understand it and they thrive it, and they just go in and take care of business. They don't take names, they just take care of business. They get power and they take care of business. That's the two things about them, I could say. You know, they understand power. They understand I have this power and need to learn how to use it. And then they're doggone, and when they do, they're devastated. Pure and simple. Look at Sir Crocodile. As a base person, might not necessarily, but he understands power. And he understands, you know, go in and get things done. That's it. You know, take care of business. Even Aokiji and Kizaru. Aokiji with his lazy justice and Kizaru with his nonchalant justice. They go in there when it's battle, they go in there and they take care of business, and we be done with it. When you look at doggone their weakness though, is they tend to get arrogant and cocky. And when you see I'll give three examples of what I mean by this. Well, actually four. Number one, the Enel situation. Enel versus Luffy. When Enel was not able to bypass Luffy's resistance because of his rubber with his lightning, Enel was freaked out. He had almost a mental breakdown. He was scared. He was terrified. It's the first instance of what we see with a Logia. When their powers are negated or are done away with, there's a cycle. Unless they're maybe somebody like Akainu, you know, Fleet Admiral Akainu, they're going to be shook. You don't see that in the Paramecia and the Zoan. You just don't see that because they don't come into it this whole understanding of power, this whole somewhat God complex. The second example we see is Ace, you know, the whole Ace versus Blackbeard fight. And when Ace, he's the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Battalions. He's been in Newport or whatever, blah blah blah. He's had many battles. But he got caught up, he got cocky. He's like, yo, nobody can touch me. Doggone Blackbeard comes in there, takes away all of his devil fruit abilities. He was dusted. He was handled. He was shot. You understand? Then when we see Caribou think he can slide up in there, he's all cocky stuff. He faces off against Luffy and them. You know, they trap him and all that. He's like, what? He was shot. And then when we had with Peckham's into on Fishman Island, Peckham's he talks about, when you could say Caesar Clown followed suit as well. The whole, you know, and then there's the arrogance with the whole Magellan's and Mere Paramecia. But anyways, what Peckham said on Fishman Island, or was it Madam Shirley? One of the two. Anyways, it was said how Logias, who are too full of themselves or something like that, Logias who are too dependent on their abilities often die young. And that was actually referenced by Admiral Zephyr aka Z in film Z, okay? When he was talking to Borsalino, he's like, you're too reliant on your devil fruit ability. He kind of told that to Luffy, but he really told that to Borsalino because Borsalino, he gets cocky with his devil fruit. So there's the arrogance factor. When we look at Paramecia, understand the mindset. Paramecia's mindsets are all over the place. That just like their abilities, they represent. I mean, you got some from serious to goofy to, you know, you got all these different types of temperaments. So, and it goes with the unpredictability, the unexpected whole thing. And the second thing you got to think of when you think of Paramecias, you got to think of variety. They realize any Paramecia worth his salt, they're like the middle grade. They understand they need training. If they're going to be powerful, they need training. But out of all the, as a whole, out of all the devil fruits, the Paramecians know their anatomy the best of all. They know their limitations, okay? They recognize this and it pushes them to the next level. That's why they have so much beautiful upside. As opposed to the arrogance of the Logias in the non-training capacity of a lot of zones. Now, while those are all great and dandy, the thing about Paramecia fighters is they're, how do I say this? They don't get lazy, they don't get cocky, but what they do is they become not too reliant on their ability, but they go into situations too headstrong a lot of times. They go into situations, you know, because they come in with their unexpected ability. They come into situations where they can misread situations. Okay, they go in there because they have their ability to misread. Now it's not that arrogant mentality, but it's they don't think things through fully. That's what even Law, even though he plans and everything with his whole thing with Doflamingo, he didn't really make that plan right. Like, he planned, but it wasn't smart. You see Luffy go in there all the time. What else? Who else is an excellent example? I mean, look at the Paramecia. They don't think things through properly. While they're not arrogant, but they do rely on their unexpected nature. You know, their unexpected nature becomes a hindrance to them. And when you look at Zoans are hybrids. They think like humans, but also think like the animals. Okay, so they tend the animal natures tend to extend from them. And I can give off Chopper's reindeer nature. You look at Lucci's the leopard nature, Jabbar, Kaku, bit of maybe an exception, because I guess because he hadn't had the fruit that long. You look at who else? What was it? The Boa's sister. You understand? They're very much, you know, they're in sync. So they're both animalistic as well as human, which is both good and bad. And here's the drawback. Although that's a positive, you look at the negative, they become too instinctual. Now, they don't charge into situations headlong like the Paramecias, and they're not arrogant like the Logias. But the doggone Zoans, they rely too much on instinct. Whatever their natural instinct is, they do it. Now, this gets problematic because you look at the awakened Zoan, the top of the Zoan, they become almost mindless, straight up instinct. Whatever their instinct, I mean, they're directed, but they become too animalistic. You understand what I'm saying? So their thoughts are too rash. They're not irrational, but they're just rash. You understand what I'm saying? Now, when we look at also last category, I've dealt with abilities, I've dealt with what was it? Combat. I've dealt with psychology. When you look at what could I say? What's the last category that I want to analyze? I'm trying to get my thoughts together because I'm trying to remember. Well, you look at the ability, not the abilities, but you look at how their views of the world. I'll go like this. You look at their philosophy, and you're just saying, what are you talking about? Their perspective, I should say. You look at the perspective of how they're viewed, how they view themselves, and how they view the world. Understand this? Once again, how each of the types of users in general, how people, the world views them, how they view themselves, and how they view the world around them. When you look at Logia users, the pros of their view, how they view themselves, I mean how others view them. Others are terrified. It's an initial, because of their destructive capacity, others are terrified. Which means the Logia users, whether they're weak, Caribou, for example, he's not that powerful, but people are scared of him because of his ability. How how they view themselves. I wouldn't say they view themselves in an arrogant manner, so to say, but they view themselves as sort of entitled, you can go with. Not arrogant, but they're entitled to be able to just do as they wish. Okay? In general, there's some exceptions. You see that with Anel. You see that even with Ace. You see that with Blackbeard. Shoot, look at Akainu. Look at Aokiji. You see this constantly. Caribou. They do what they want. They're entitled to. Now, when you look at them and their view of the world should be shaped to the way they see fit. Like, not saying everybody should act like them, but when they enter the scene, because they're feared, because they see themselves as entitled to life, to things, it should be the way, things should operate how I want them to when I'm on the scene. And if they don't, I'm going to change it. And that can be good or bad. It can be good or bad. Now, the weakness of all this is because people fear them, because they're entitled, and because, they want to bring that change. They want to shape things. They get to be, not just cocky, not just arrogant, but they get they started to become a twisted view of reality, where everybody else, they understand the balance of power. I mean, these guys understand power, but they don't understand the balance of power. Their view gets warped, to say the least. Now, when you look at Paramecians, okay, Paramecia users, how others view them? Others view them as freaks of nature, as freaks, as not normal, as unnatural, okay, as different, rejects, outcasts, however you want to, you can go from that route. Except, there's of course exception like Chop, but that was a whole reindeer. That's different. When you look at how they view themselves as unique, as they should be able to do as they like, but they're not entitled to anything. They want to do, they're like kind of the underdog kind of thing, underdog mentality, you could say. And that makes them, and they strive to, to be greater. And when you look at how they view the world as screwed up. As a person, they want to bring change to, they don't, well, it depends on the character. They see the world as screwed up, period. I mean, you could go Doflamingo, Don Quixote Doflamingo, you look at Buggy, you look at Luffy, you look at Law. They see the world as screwed up. Now, how they operate, they may change, they may do it, go into the chaos, or how they ever do it depends on the individual. But they see the world as screwed up. The con of Paramecia's thought is that because they're different, they accept, but others, they have to become, they have to do things. They have to strive for more. They're forced to make an impact, or else be not counted as important. Okay? How do we put it? It's like, if they don't, do something big in the world, they won't be viewed as important. Their value is very small. Because they're freaks. That's just how the world operates. Now, when you look at Zoans, how the world views them, animals. Not in like animals like view them as second class, but how they view them as animalistic. They view them as being able to be used and manipulated. I guess you could say how animals used and manipulated. How if they act properly, fine. If they don't act properly, done with them. Now, how they view themselves, it's a dual mentality as both human and animal without even realizing it. Like, they fight the animal urges while trying to remain human. It's an interesting concept if you really think about it. You see it throughout fiction and even in life. The animal nature. their instincts, and how they view the world. They view the world as a bit of as a cruel place. Now, not, while Paramecia see it screwed up, they see things, they view it as a cruel place. So they more internalize. While the Paramecia, here's the difference. The Paramecia externalize. Okay? The Zoan internalized the effect. Look at Chopper. You know what I'm saying? He was shunned, but it brought it within him. Luffy wanted to do. Chopper didn't. Brook, he was what he was, but when Brook finds the Straw Hats, he's like, yo, let me do something. You know what I'm saying? Chopper was like, no, I don't want to, understand it. Now, the con of this thought is that they tend to take a back seat of all of the devil. They tend to take a back seat unless they're very powerful. Okay, they tend to. Well, even Lucci. Look at Rob Lucci. He took a back seat to doggone. I know he was under government, blah blah blah, whatever. But Spandam, freaking Rob Lucci should have been leading that. Spandam. Lucci was obedient to that fool. He didn't. You understand what I'm saying? Like they tend to be subservient, you could say. So when I look at all these things, from the abilities to the combat to the psychology and the perspective aspect, the philosophy, when I look at once again the abilities, while I have to, overall, let me put this picture. I pick Paramecia as the best of all of them. All of you said Paramecia, I picked the greatest. Now, because if you look at it, once again, from the ability standpoint, the Logias are too OP, and from the get-go, they're too destructive. When you look at the Zoans, they're too limited. They have multiple transformations, but they're quite limited. You look at the Paramecias, you need to, they're training. They tend to not train their abilities. Let's put it that way. They're not that they're limited. They should not train their abilities because they're outright, it's simple. Their abilities are simple. The Paramecia, since they're so hindered, they are forced to train their abilities. When you look at their combat, the Logias, since they're so powerful and so destructive, they can become careless, and their carelessness leads to, against a powerful hockey user, they can get wrecked. Even Sir Crocodile, doggone, his weakness was the moisture, whether the water or the blood. Luffy, who was a weaker opponent, you could say, wrecked him. With the Zoan, on the other hand, their ability, they're straightforward, they're great fighters initially. But when they're faced off against Paramecia and Logia, especially Logias, they're underclassed because of their lack of training, because they're not, well versed enough in combat. They're too much about their base ability. And when it comes to Paramecia, because they've trained so much, their upside is ridiculous with their hacks ability and everything. And when it comes from the psychological standpoint, overall, the doggone Logias are cocky. They're arrogant. Okay? They rely too much on their abilities. When you come from the Zoan side, they're doggone too instinctual, too animalistic. They don't think beyond their simple limitations. When you look at the Paramecias are unexpected to understand this. They get, they understand themselves, and thus understanding themselves, they understand their weaknesses, and though they try to fix them, improve on those weaknesses. When you look at them from the perspective sides, the Logia are entitled. They think they're entitled for the world, because they're at such a position, because they have power. They're entitled. They come from an entitlement, perspective. When you come from the Zoan, they come from that of, of subservient, Heading to the backgrounds, into the shadows. I don't want to disturb things. You look for the doggone look. You look at the Paramecias. They are actors. They're going to do. Period. Because unlike the Logia, though, here's the thing. They're both actors. Here's the difference between them. The Logia feel entitled. The Paramecia know they ain't entitled to jack because of their different treatment and the way others view them. Understand that? This video has been long enough. The unexpected one to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me your thoughts. What do you think? What devil fruits do you think are the best of all of them in general? What are your favorite devil fruits? You know, this and that. And till next time, y'all. Peace.